Hey guys, welcome to a Psalm for Today, where we celebrate the fact that Jesus is Lord. I want to reassure you, Jesus is Lord. He hasn't changed. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. His Lordship yesterday is His Lordship today. I wanted to come to you with my live stream today by the little lake here in Lumpini Park. I was watching a bunch of fish right by the shore there. It was fun to see. Psalm 69, the second half, is the psalm for today. It is interesting to study the Psalms. Psalm 69 is an illustration of what I think Walter Brueggemann, which he adopted from Paul Ricoeur, a philosopher in phenomenology, says you kind of start out oriented, and then pretty soon you're disoriented, and then you end up reoriented. Well, Psalm 69 kind of skips the oriented part. The psalmist just opens the first verse. Save me, O God, for the waters have come into my soul. I mean, it just starts out that you know what, this is disoriented. And sometimes your disorientation is a medical report. I will remember as long as I live, I believe, the day I walked in my house and Paula was standing there and she said, well, you better get used to old age without me. It's malignant, she said. Talk about disoriented. It only took like 13 seconds, right? And my head was spinning already. It's like, what? What a shock and what a surprise that was. Disorientation. But over time, we come to a place of where there is reorientation. So orientation moves into disorientation. Disorientation moves into a reorientation. And Psalm 69 is predominantly filled with the psalmist's disorientation. It says, verse 19, you, God, have known my reproach. Verse 20, this reproach has broken my heart. Verse 21, they gave also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. I mean, he is just disoriented and kind of upset about it, really. The poet's like firing away on this disorientation. He's saying about his enemies, let their habitation be desolate, let none dwell in their tents. And so this disorientation is significant. But towards verse number 29, the psalmist begins to reorient. But I am poor and sorrowful. Let thy salvation, O God, set me on high. It's the interesting ways of God that this season of disorientation for the psalmist and the season of disorientations for you and me brings us to a place of poverty. It brings us to a place of there's absolutely nothing I can do. The psalmist is saying, I'm hopeless, really. I have nothing that I can bring to this equation, but I am poor and sorrowful. And believe it or not, what we know from the New Testament and throughout the Old is that God has a special place in His heart for those that are poor. Not only financially, but poor in spirit. Jesus brought that over into the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Also, blessed are the poor. But I am poor and sorrowful. And one of the great things that we can do in our lifetime as we navigate our emotions, as we navigate our days, is to acknowledge the disorientations that happen and then realize it was that disorientation that produced the poverty that we need to actually be saved. Praise God. He says in verse 30, I will praise the name of God with a song and I will magnify Him with thanksgiving. He says, I'm poor. I got nothing to help me, but I still got my praise, right? I still have the ability to worship. And you can take away the freedom of motion. You can take away the freedom of finances. You can take away everything, but you can't take away my attitude of praise. And he says, I will praise the name of God with a song and will magnify Him with thanksgiving. Verse 31, this also shall please the Lord better than an ox or a bullock that hath horns and hooves. This praise from my heart is better than a sacrifice without my heart. This praise from my heart is better than a praise or a sacrifice without my heart. The humble shall see this and be glad. Again, I'm hopeless. I'm disoriented. I'm humbled. But guess what? God comes to the humble. God comes to those that are needy. The humble shall see this, verse 32 says, and be glad. And your heart shall live that seek God. Verse 33 is where I'm headed. It says, for the Lord heareth the poor. For the Lord heareth the poor. Don't resist poverty of spirit. It is so difficult in our lives to be willing to acknowledge our poverty of spirit. I'll give an illustration. I am launching Second Curve Coaching along with a great team of board members as we launch this ministry. And to be honest with you, I have no idea how to do it. I met with a pastor 2 days ago here in Thailand. He said, what's the plan? I said, well, we don't really have a plan yet. What's the strategy? Well, we don't really have a strategy yet. In fact, what we think God is calling us to is not really this big structured thing, but a relational network of people willing to serve, especially Christian leaders who experience poverty. And it's funny to me that if we aren't careful, we need a $10 million budget a year just to give $50 to somebody in the streets. There are many organizations that say they serve the poor that in fact keep 50, 70, one I heard of, 97% of the donations went to keep the U.S. system going, and only 3% made it to the need. Not interested in that. What we're interested in is helping leaders that can do a great job. These leaders are called, they're anointed, they're gifted, they're blessed, and yet they could use a cheerleader. They could use someone who comes along and says, oh, I've been there and I've had that feeling before. Guy on North Coast Church, Larry Osborne, he called it dumb taxes. He said, I'm going to teach you what I know so that you don't pay the same dumb taxes that I already paid. I paid them for you. Right? And so to make these resources available to leaders who experience poverty, listen to the psalm again. It's Psalm 69:33. For the Lord heareth the poor. I want to ask a very strategic question, I think, for this season of the American Christian life, who's had a great career. You've succeeded. Your career has gone great. You have your retirement set up. You're ready to roll. I ask you this: do you also hear the poor? In this reorientation phase of Psalm 69, the psalmist says, "Oh man, this thing has been tough for me." But guess what? What's tough for me turned out for my good, because I'm poor, but God heareth the poor. And I'd love to ask that you consider hearing the cries of leaders, hearing the cries of somebody in your skill set. Let's say you're a nurse. What could you do to help nurses who experience poverty? They're great nurses. They're trained, but they just don't make much money. They just don't have a way to access further training. What would you say to a great scholar that just doesn't have access to funds to get the next level, the PhD that they want to get, or whatever the case might be? And so when we think about this orientation, disorientation, reorientation idea for viewing the Psalms, part of the reorientation is this thing has made me poor in spirit. It has, I'm speaking here on Sunday, and I thought, I wonder if I remember how. I just laid aside preaching, and I knew how to do that. That's something that I could do. And now I'm poor in spirit. I'm like, how do you write a sermon? What do you say? Will anybody listen? Does anybody care? Right? And so orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And the fact is, it's in that reorientation of realizing that we are poor, that without God, we will never reorient, that he says he heareth the poor. And so when he heareth the poor, what will he hear? He will hear us praising him, because that's what the psalmist says we do. I might have vinegar to drink and gall, right? But I still have my praise going. I still have my worship going. I still have everything that God provided for my life still happening in my interiority. And so, sisters and brothers, We praise God. He heareth the poor. And in your disorientation seasons, remember, a reorientation time is coming. It will all make sense someday, maybe not until eternity. Remember the old song, we'll talk it over in the by and by? I'll ask the reasons, he'll tell me why. When we talk it over, what does it mean? It means down there's trail somewhere. God's going to help us make sense of all this. And so until then, we're poor in spirit, and we rely totally on God. And in relying totally